I believe that this great police force in this incredibly diverse city can and will show the nation how to bridge any divide.
Vice President Biden speaking yesterday at the funeral of New York City police officer Rafael Ramos, one of two policemen executed by a man who said he was avenging the killing of unarmed black men by police. More than 20,000 law enforcement officers gathered for the ceremony. Jason, how do you explain it with an African-American president in a country that some people said was post-racial? How do you explain the fact that we're having this debate over race and the criminal justice system, and it's still so raw?
Well, part of it is that the left has no interest in being post-racial. I think they pretend to want to be post-racial, but they practice identity politics, which is divvying us up by race and gender and sexual orientation, and then making specific appeals based on those characteristics. So I think this whole notion that the left wants to be post-racial is false. And this is, I think, demonstrates that. What we see with this false narrative being pushed in the wake of the Garner and the Ferguson incidents. The problem is not police shooting black men. That is not what is driving the homicide rate in this country. It is non-police shootings of black men that is driving the homicide rate. Yet we have protesters all over this country pushing a false narrative, and everyone from the president on down refusing to simply correct the record here.
But it's not just Ferguson, and it's not just New York City. Let me put these numbers on the screen. In a recent poll, whites are more than twice as likely as blacks to think that both races are treated equally by police. You see, only 22% of blacks think they face equal treatment by police. Bob, this is a continuing problem.
Well, of course it is. It's real. But I thought at that funeral, Bill Bratton, who's the police commissioner, gave a very good talk, and he said, quote, when we see each other, we'll heal. And I think that's exactly, this is about exposure, this is about talking. It is a serious problem, one obviously Obama hasn't solved, and it's going to continue.
But when you say when we see each other, my gosh, it's 2014, we do have an African-American president. When are we going to see each other if we don't see each other now?
Well, it takes work, and it takes lessons, I mean, awful, tragic lessons like this that push the issue in people's faces. And, you know, the police department's going to be strong and will go on and do its job, and so will New York City and all of these places. But no one has found a formula to bring about that healing, including Obama.
Well, you talk about New York City, and we've seen a terrible case study in New York over the last month or so. After the grand jury voted not to indict the police officer in the Eric Garner choking, the mayor talked about teaching his biracial son to protect himself, not only from criminals, but also from the police. Then, at the funeral yesterday, the mayor continued to try to reach out to the force.
For so many of our young people, there's a fear. And for so many of our families, there's a fear. So I've had to worry over the years. Sherlane's had to worry. Was Dante safe each night?
Police officers are called peace officers because that's what they do. They keep the peace.
But outside the church, hundreds of police officers turned their back on the screen outside the church, showing the words of Mayor de Blasio. Steve, de Blasio has unleashed quite a backlash in New York, hasn't he?
He has, and I think looking forward, this is, I think, of most concern. You have Mayor de Blasio, who ran for office, in effect running against tougher policing. I mean, he basically said, yes, it's true we have peace and security in New York City, but that's not necessarily a result of the policies followed by Mayor Giuliani, Mayor Bloomberg, et cetera. So he came in to change it. He frontally took on the police unions, the police force, and aligned himself purposefully with the protesters. It's no surprise now that the police force, that the police unions in particular, are saying, you're not our guy, and we don't buy the words that you're saying now in the aftermath of a tragedy, of this tragic killing of these two officers, when you weren't with us before. So I think Mayor de Blasio has a lot of work to do, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to solve that rift, to bridge that gap between the things he had said, the way that he ran for office, and the way that the police look at him now.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Facebook from Tammy Carroll, who wrote, "Why is it all we ever get told is that the police community must be retrained to learn how to deal with black communities, but no one has ever introduced the concept of the black community being retrained to be law-abiding, productive, respectful citizens?" Susan, that's pretty tough talk, but to get back, and I'm sure some people will be offended by it, but it is the view of a lot of people. And to get back to what Jason said, the biggest threat to young black men doesn't come from the cops. It comes from other young black men.
Yeah, well, that's undeniably true and shouldn't be ignored. But surely it's possible to criticize black police tactics that target African-American men inappropriately, as I think you'd have to say that Eric Garner cell phone video showed, without criticizing the police force as a whole, honoring the police force for what they do and the great danger that they undergo, but also say there are cases in which the behavior of the police has been inappropriate and ought to be addressed.
But the problem is when we take exceptions and pretend that they're the norm. Clearly, there is excess force used by police in some instances, but that is not producing this high black body count in this country. Tension between the black community and the police department stems from black criminality in this country, high black crime rates. Blacks are about 13% of the population, but commit more than half of all murders in this country. Blacks are arrested at 2 to 3 times their number in the population for all manner of violent crime, all manner of property crime. Until that ends, you are going to have tensions between the police and the black community. You are going to have young black men viewed suspiciously. If we want to address perceptions, negative perceptions of young black men, we have to address the behavior that is driving those perceptions. And that is not a conversation President Obama or Eric Holder or Al Sharpton or all the rest want to have, because they have a vested interest in pushing a false narrative, which is that racism is an all-purpose explanation of what drives what's wrong in black America.
Okay, but the mayor of New York now has a big leadership challenge, and he can't distance himself from the police force. It's his police force. It's like when presidents criticize the CIA and all of a sudden it's their CIA. They look very differently on it. And they have to reach out, and he's got to reach out to the police force, and that's where there has to be some reconciliation. And, you know, that's not hard for a good leader.
At the very least, he needs to stop, I would say, demonizing the police force, despite the fact that, I mean, the Eric Garner video, I think, was horrendous. And it's one of the things that has caused people to react in this sort of on a gut level way. And I think it's a mistake to lump the Ferguson verdict and the Ferguson outcome, where I think you can have people with very different views come to different conclusions. I mean, reasonable people can disagree with what happened there if you read the grand jury testimony. The Eric Garner case is very different. I mean, you look at the video, it seems inconceivable that that was a proportionate response to whatever it was that he had done. Now, maybe the case, as Jason suggests, I think it is the case that that's not representative of sort of day-to-day policing in the United States. But the perception in this case is the reality, and it's driving this debate.
Well, that gets us to another issue, and that is the grand jury. And what we saw, one could argue rightly or wrongly in Ferguson, but I think much more troublesome in the case of Staten Island is that you get a grand jury with a prosecutor who deals with the police force every day, and he goes and talks to the grand jury, and somehow, in the Garner case, best example, not only isn't the cop convicted, he's not even has to stand trial, a reasonable cause. I mean, the question that there was not reasonable cause, that he had caused the death, maybe not murder, but manslaughter, whatever, of Eric Garner certainly is troublesome, isn't it?
Well, and there are two things that could address this problem. One is to remove prosecution from local prosecutors. There's a lot of public support for that idea, for having independent prosecutors in cases.
In cop cases.
In cop cases where where police officers are accused of an inappropriate death of a suspect or an individual. And the other is body cameras. I mean, it seems to me that the power of the cell phone video in the Garner case was like that could have also exonerated the police if it had shown a different scene. So the move toward body cameras for police seems to me to be an important step that could address some of the divisions that you see in perceptions.
Jason, do you agree to any of these reforms, or do you think we're just on the wrong track?
They're effects. I mean, they're not causes. I mean, we had a camera in the Garner case, but that's not all the evidence in that case, and only the grand jury has seen all of the evidence in that case, and I'm reluctant to second guess a group of people that has seen all of the evidence when we've just seen this snippet. So I'd be hesitant. Both the prosecutor in New York and in St. Louis have successfully prosecuted other cops in the past. So the idea that they can't do this properly, again, is something I'm not going to assume.